Hello and welcome to this Webflow live stream. My name is Aaron Corbett. I am so excited to be back behind the desk and honored that I get the privilege and the chance to talk about component slots and shareable libraries. So it's been a while since I've been behind the desk, so appreciate all of you joining. We've got some amazing people in the chat. Welcome Marhan, Luis from Northeast Texas, Matt. Really excited that you're all here with me and here to learn about component slots. So go ahead, let us know where you're joining from in the chat. A few things before we kind of jump into today's topic. As always, every month we're going to be raffling off a Webflow Conf ticket. So in the description of this video, there's a link. You can enter your email, and every month we're giving away a free ticket to Webflow Conf San Francisco or London. And if you can't make it, we'll send a little gift your way to make it worth your while. And as always, appreciate you joining these live streams. In the chat, you can go ahead and, I'm hoping it's this way, I think. On the chat, you can drop your name to see your name in the credits at the end. But yeah, really excited to be back here. So let me know where you're joining in the chat. Really excited to talk about component slots and shareable libraries, two of the kind of most recent updates that Webflow has done in terms of making it easy to scale your design systems and implement them in a way that is consistent across all of your different pages and sites. We got some folks, Joseph from Nigeria, Glenn, welcome, Edgar Allen. Always, I got your mug. I have the Slater mug. So yeah, in the chat and on the stream, appreciate you guys joining. We got Nathan from Vancouver. Yeah, really excited to be back and streaming. So yeah, shareable. And we're also going to be talking about shareable components. Sorry, shareable libraries that you can share across different sites, so you can have one component in one place updated, and that kind of change will be reflected across all of your different sites. So really making sure that it's easy to scale and implement your design system. So without further ado, really excited, really appreciate all of you joining. I know I'm competing with the Olympics, which is really hard, and I'm sure a lot of you have one screen with the Olympics and one screen on this, so appreciate you joining, and let's kind of jump in here. Okay, so our goal for today is we're going to be the designers, we're going to be the Webflow designers, but we want to enable our marketing team to build their own pages, right? So we're going to put ourselves in the shoes. We want to create this scalable design system that they can just be like, okay, I can use these components and build this website really easily, but we wanted to do it in a way that respects our design system and assuming that they are not kind of Webflow developers like us. And so here I have this page. All right, so we've got a nav, we've got a little hero, we've got little section here, and we're going to talk about kind of component slots, but I also want to talk about components in general and how to think about your component structure when building a system that will enable someone to build a page like this. So Martina has appreciated me and Figma, which, okay, maybe a third screen for the Olympics. That'll be the perfect workspace, I think. Okay, and so I'm not only going to kind of jump into component slots, I really want to talk about component slots in the context of thinking of a design system. So this is where we're starting. Our goal is to enable marketers to build this page themselves. Really, that's the goal, respecting our design system. So where we're going to start is I have this Webflow site, and I have a component library. So this is all of the different components that we've built. Actually, if I go here, you can see all of the different components that we have for our team. And what we want to do is go ahead and adapt this component library to include component slots and enable to build something like this. So let me know in the chat if that makes sense. So I'm going to start kind of exploring this page, and we're going to build it together. So what I see first is this little navigation. Now, when I look at this nav, I assume that it is static, right? So what I mean by that is the content itself within that nav should not change. So I expect it to be the same across all of the different sites, all of the different pages. So that means it should be a component, but additionally what it should mean is that it should have no properties. It shouldn't mean, if I'm a marketer, I should drag in the component, the nav component, and not be able to change it. So if I go over to my library, we do have a nav component. I'm actually going to be building along, right? So we're going to be building this page. Our kind of use case, I didn't talk about it much, was we're going to build landing pages for ads. where we're targeting IBM as a customer. So we want to build a landing page where they land and see their name. So I can just go ahead and add a nav. I'm Control K, I'm adding it in, and you'll notice that I'm not adjusting anything. I'm just putting it in, and that is a static component. Next, we have this hero section. Now this hero section, you can see this title and this subheading should be adaptable. The person building this page, our marketer in our instance, should be able to say, I want this heading. I want to change the heading and I want to change the subheading. Maybe they can even change the CTA, right? So to enable that, I'm going to unhide here. I'm trying to use Figma a little more as a teaching principle. I'm not great at Figma. We're going to have variable content. When I hear variable content, that means we're going to use properties in the component itself to say, hey, in this instance, when we use this component on this page, we want to change the heading. We want to give the marketer the flexibility to do that. So let me know if that distinction between static and variable makes sense. I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with component properties. So next step is I'm going to go into my component library. I'm going to find that component. Now, it does have some properties already, but they're only around the background image and the copy in the call to action. So let's go ahead and add properties to the heading and the subheading to allow that flexibility. So I'm going to double click. I'm going to go into the heading, go into settings, and then in the text, right? So this is the text that applies. We want to make this variable. So we're going to connect a new property. We're going to create a new property. I'm going to call this heading text. So what this does is it says when we use this component, the person using this component will be able to adapt the text. They'll be able to pick their text. So that is a property of this element on this component. We're going to do the same thing right here on the subheading. Add some text. We're going to call this subheading text. Some great questions in the chat. Thank you, Kev. I'll address that in a moment. So we now have two properties on this component. We have the heading and the subheading. In addition to the ones we had before, we can go into props, move those around. So heading text, subheading text. If you want to propose some heading text or some subheading text, let me know in the chat. As everyone knows, I am terrible at, blank copy or lorem ipsum. So let's go back to the page we're building. And this is kind of fun. We're only going to be using components like so far throughout this page. So that was, I think, called hero. I'm going to pick that. There we go. And here on the right, we can start adapting. So this is why IBM needs a retreat. Next, it's going to be, so this would be retreats are known to boost productivity by 10%. ROI is a no-brainer. So me as the marketer, I can now decide what I want those two kind of the text elements to be. So I'm giving some flexibility. I can also pick a different background image, and I can pick the static text as well. So that's static, and then we've talked about properties. Now the star of the show. Oh no, we have one more. If we go here, this one right here is a static one. So we're just going to add in the kind of customer marquee, I think it's called. Yeah, logo marquee. There we go. And again, this is static, so we're just adding that in. And now we get to the star of the show, which is component slots. Well, component slots are, going to try to explain it, are basically kind of an empty div. It's saying something could go here. So when I look at this section, I could build this to be static in the way that I force the marketer to say, okay, you're always going to have, a listing on the left, something static in the middle, and then something on listing on the right. And you can pick the image, you can pick the title, and I could force that, I can put that in. But these are existing cards in our structure. So if I go over to our component library, I've actually already built these cards. I have the cover, I have this one, and then I have this one. So this is actually just a different, these two are the same component used differently. So instead of thinking of, okay, these are dynamic in the sense that the user can select the copy and the images, why don't we also view the whole thing as dynamic? We can actually view this as, okay, this is a 3-column layout. And the end user, the marketer, can put whatever they want in that first column, in the second column, and in the third column. So when we're building out our structure, we can leave it blank. We can say something will go here, but we're going to let the end user decide what that is. And it's not just going to be a property. It's going to be a whole tree of elements. In fact, in Webflow today, the only thing you can add are, I shouldn't say the only thing, the thing you can add are components. So we're going to build out a structure that says we're going to build a 3-column layout. And the end user can use any component in the 3 columns. We can do that with a 2-column as well, or 4, or whatever we want, right? So as the end user, I can say, well, I want 3 listings, or I want 2 different cards. And so that way our design system scales much easier, because maybe I'll end up with 10 variations of cards, right? And I don't want to build components for each mix, right? I want to say card 1, card 2, card 3 on this 3-column layout, and then build another component with a different variation of card 4, 5, 6, right? So we're going to go ahead and use component slots to say, this is a 3-column layout, and you as the person building out this section can decide what component goes into each. So let me know in the chat if that makes sense. Martina asks, can those cards be CMSs? Absolutely. In fact, there's a question of, should this page be a CMS? And we're going to talk about that once we've kind of finished the section in understanding the distinction between static components, component slots, and properties. So what I've built, just to speed things up here, is I have this kind of section which has in it a container and an empty div, right? So very simple. And what I would normally do is I would start building out this whole component. Instead, I'm just going to create a structure. I'm going to say this is a 3-column section. So here for this style, I'm going to call this 3-column layout, and I'm going to call this live because we're doing this live. And simply going to call this a grid with 3 columns and 1 row, right? And within each column, I'm going to go ahead and add I'm going to go ahead and add I need to turn it into a component first. So we're going to turn that into a component. We're going to call this component 3-column layout. And within here, now we can add a slot. So my first column is empty. It's the promise of something going in. I'm going to do that 3 times. I'm going to add a slot. I'm going to go ahead and add a 3rd slot. So we're saying within this 3-column layout, when the user uses it, we're going to give them the flexibility in adding in whatever component they want. Obviously, hopefully they'll talk to us and we'll say, hey, ideally use cards, but that is really up to them. And it's really as simple as that. So now we can go into IBM. I'm not going to style it on mobile. We can do that in a bit if we have some time. And I could add a 3-column layout. Now, you'll notice it's empty. I do have these as properties. And then let's go ahead and add a component. So now if I go into my cards, the first one is a destination. As I drag, I can see on the right that I can add it in as a slot. Not as a slot, within the slot. And now I have my first card, right? I hope that the distinction between why we build this statically versus dynamically is clear. Let me know in the chat if that's the case. Next, and maybe I'll say, you know what? Me personally, I want listing, add. Now I have that flexibility without creating complex properties. So let's go ahead and add another destination. And let's add the add card at the end. Now, I know it seems simple. It doesn't seem revolutionary. But really, the flexibility that this provides is truly, truly amazing. And a lot of you in the community have built some pretty amazing systems, right, using this. So I'll cover some of those at the end. Hopefully this is making sense. Now, you'll notice that these two cards are similar, right? And if I go into that card in my component library, I see that it has properties, right? So just like this Cozy Winter Retreat is a version of Serene Tropical Isle, we can adapt the text using properties, but we can do that within the component's kind of master component, if you will. So if I go here and I click on the component and I go into content 1, I then see the properties of that component, right? And hopefully you'll see how much flexibility this truly provides. So let's turn this into Winter Cabin Retreat, Cozy Winter Retreat. So I'm going to change the heading. Location is going to be Whistler, Canada. And then what is that copy here? We have Boost Team. Okay, it's the same one. Great. And this is not for 100 people. I need to change the image. Winter Cabin. All right. So now we've used a component slot, the promise that we will put a component in it, giving more flexibility. We can also build a 2-column layout, right, as a section. So when that user, the marketer, is building the page, they can decide whether they want 3-column or 2-column. And then within, they can decide which cards are going in. Now imagine the amount of complexity to build something like that only with component properties. This is much simpler, much more scalable. And as you build more and more cards and more components, those will all be usable within component slots. So this 3-column layout becomes much more powerful. Now, this is a 3-column layout. I need to make that a property as well, right? So you could also have, obviously, properties and component slots within. So 3-column layout. Let's go here. Let's make this a heading text. And what do we have? Our favorite destinations. Great. So let's update that. Destination. Our favorite destinations. Okay. Great. So, question from Kevin. Explaining this to a client is going to make my head spin. That's a great comment. And now, how I'm going to imagine myself? I'm going to imagine myself in the shoes of the client. Well, you don't really need to explain to them how this is built, right? And I think that's the amazing part here, is that if they simply need to understand that this is a structure, this is a kind of section, and this is how I'm thinking of the structure, and then they can use anything else within that. So I can go ahead and add it as a new section. Let's just imagine. I wouldn't put it here. And then simply explain to them that they can just take a card and drag it, drop it into any of these slots, right? So yes, there is some complexity in how you build it, how you think about your structure. And as a Webflow developer, that is your expertise. And in partnership with that client, understand how they want to work, right? And build the components the right way for them. Maybe they're a little less technical. Maybe, you know what, they don't want this ability to add in components and thinking about structure. Well, you can rely, therefore, more on props, right? Imagine that, say, hey, this is actually static. You always are going to do one listing, and then one add card, and you'll have just more components, right? Because you have to do variations of that. And really, I think that's what's interesting here, is that you are matching your expertise or the complexity of what you build to the understanding or the investment that the client puts in as well. So you, as the Webflow developer, have to find the right balance between properties and component slots to build the scalable system. Yeah, so there's a question from Airbus. Can a component slot be dynamically added? So if you want to do 6 or 8 or 10 dynamically. Now, today, you can do that. However, it is a little more complex. You might have to do styling. I would probably recommend just keeping it simple for now, and simply creating a static layout, and then you can add in component slots. So to answer your question differently, I just want to make sure I'm answering correctly. there is no way to add a dynamic way of component slots, right? So you can't say add up to the number of columns, if that makes sense. So if it's a 4-column layout, you have to specify in advance that you need to put in 4 component slots. And secondly, if you add in columns, it's not going to go dynamically add component slots. So let me know, Airbus, if that answers your question. But what you can do is create different options in terms of layouts, right? So if I go here, component library, I can build 3-column layout, 2-column layout, 8-column layout, right? And I know some folks in the community are building kind of more dynamic options here. So would love to share those as well. If you build them, if you drop them in the chat. Okay, so let's build out the rest of the page, right? It's relatively simple. We have a pre-footer here and then the footer at the end. So let's go to IBM. I think it's called pre-footer. Yeah, there you go. And then footer. Okay, so now we've built out the page. Now, I know for a long time, Webflow users, maybe even more recent, like there's a beauty in this right here, right? It's only using components. So what we know when we're building components is that we're using the design systems of our design team, of what we want this to look like, right? And that's really, really beautiful. And it also means that any changes, right? So if we were to say, hey, we're changing the font, or we want this space differently, or actually, you know, this isn't the style that we want anymore, you can make a change here and it'll be reflected across every instance of that component across your site, right? So there really is a power in building in, you know, this way right here as a marketer, right? So it's easy for that marketer. It's also easy for the designer to make updates and not worry about, oh, where are all of these kind of components living? Where is every instance of this 2-button setup that we have across all of our systems? Now, until recently, you were limited to this site. So what that means is if you were to, you know, maybe want your marketers to work in a different site, they would have to go in and copy all of these components, right? So, you know, a lot of folks will have, similar to this, a little component library with a wrapper, and then you'll copy those over, and there's a lot of work involved in making sure that those two systems are exactly the same. And not only that, but it kind of breaks the connection, right? So if I make a change in this component, right, in the nav bar, for instance, it's not going to be reflected on another site using these components because that connection doesn't work. So that is a long-winded introduction into shareable libraries. Shareable libraries are a way to create a component, create a single source of truth for certain components, and then share that single source of truth across sites in your workspace to say, hey, if I want to change the nav, I'm going to change it in this one place, and everywhere else that uses that nav will have the option of updating to this new style. Now, I don't know. I'm super excited about this because I love single sources of truth. I love the idea that there is one place where the truth lives, and then everyone is kind of like referring to that. And I know that a lot of you designers love that as well. And we've seen some amazing kind of scale that's been built with this system. So let me walk you through it, right? So let's imagine that I have all of these components, and what I want to do is create a new environment, a new site where the marketing team can actually build these style of pages using our components, right? So I have this empty Webflow website, completely empty, right? So there's nothing in it, no variables, no nothing. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is define this as a component, as a library. So I went into components. I'm going to go manage libraries, and I'm going to share with Workspace. What that does is it makes available all of these components to install across every single site. So let's share with Workspace. Let's share updates. Okay, so now I'm seeing some questions in the chat. Keep dropping the questions. I'm definitely going to spend a lot of time answering them. So Ted or Airbus, if you have any questions, go ahead, drop them. I'm going to finish this shareable libraries, and I'd love to spend a ton of time at the end answering questions. Okay, so what I've done here is I've shared the library to my workspace. So Glenn, great question, and we're going to address that. So I have this as my library. Now, if I go into a new site, this is a blank site, I can go over to components, I can go manage libraries, and I can install that library. I can install both the components and the variables. So I'm going to install that, and this will make accessible all of those components and all of those variables within this build. Now, I'm sure if this was, Webflow conf, there'd be like a lot of cheering and I would hear y'all clap. So I'm assuming that all of you are clapping and cheering along as I did the first time I used this, which is amazing. So now we can really easily rebuild this page, but in a separate space, right? So just very quickly, entertain me here. I'm gonna create a new page, which I'm gonna call IBM. And I'm gonna just go ahead and nav. And when I search Command K, search for nav, I see nav component from the updated component library, right? That is what I kind of brought in. And now I have that component. I have that nav, right? We can do the hero as well. And I see all of the different properties. So IBM needs a retreat. And I'm in building mode, right? Me as a marketer now, if I put my marketing hat on, I've got these powers. I know that whatever I'm adding in here has been vetted by design. And I know it's up to date, right? Because I've just imported that library. I know it's what the design team wants me to be building. And really, that's amazing. That's really, really powerful, right? And also, if we go into variables, we see that there are now kind of variable groups, if you will. You have site-specific variables, and then you have variables that are coming from to your different, the variables are coming from that source, right? And they're being brought here so you can use them as well. So let's imagine that on the body, we want to use the same font. So if I go here, we go here, body, I can then select the main font from my library. Now we're closer to what we want this to look like. So now that we've imported once, let's talk about changes. So let's imagine that if I go here, you'll notice in the nav, there's a little piece of text that says that this company has raised a certain amount of money. Now, me in the past, there are different ways. Sometimes you'll have a CMS that's show hide that you add on every single page. But now that we're sharing components across different sites very easily, we can update this in our single source of truth in that original site. And then other sites can say, I want these changes to be updated. Let's go ahead and reflect those changes in our site as well. So let's do that. I'm going to go into the original. This is my component library. I'm going into the nav. So this is the original instance of our nav. And what I want to do here is I want to go ahead and add some text into this nav top wrapper. So I'm just going to add a text block. And let's bring it to, here we go. We added it here. Let's bring it here. And let's change this to be space between. There we go. And then here we're just going to say, we raised 50 million plus Series B. We are awesome. Great. Now, this, I am, maybe, no, let's keep this serious. This is our single source of truth. There you go. And now we've made a change, right? We've made a change in our single source of truth. And we want this change to be pushed or radiated out to all of the sites that use this component library. Now, that is a two-step process. First, you have to push the changes to your library, right? So the single source of truth has to say, okay, we have made the changes. You can almost see it as publishing. We have to publish these changes to the library. So you make all of your changes. You go ahead and say, okay, these are good. They have been approved, right? We can go into components, libraries, review updates. It's going to say what has changed, right? We're going to share those updates. And now these updates are coming to the library. Now, that doesn't mean that this change is now on here. It's not, in fact, because we haven't pulled the changes from the library to our site, right? So two-step process. First, you push the changes to the library, and then sites using that library have to import the changes, have to say, yes, I want those changes in my site. So let's go ahead and do that. We click here, review updates, accept all updates. And here we raised 50 million plus Series B. That change is now reflected within our text, within our components in this site. So two-step process. First, we're pushing, and then we're pulling into the sites that use the workspace library, or the shareable library, I should say. Hopefully this makes sense. So that is, now we can kind of build out the rest of the page very easily. And that is essentially how you would use shareable libraries. You build them in one place, you push them to the library that is shared across the workspace, and then sites install that library and then import changes as they come in. And obviously you still need to publish, right? You need to publish the site itself for that change to be reflected on production. And so that is the process for bringing in those changes. So I'm going to go ahead now, we're 33 minutes in, and to ask some questions, or to answer some questions. So Glenn asks, how are people feeling about a project just to hold the shared libraries as a single source of truth and then use that separately, right? So for instance, I have a site. Let me go here. Okay, where is my mouse? It is here. There we go. I have a site right here that purely, for now, holds my component library. Now, this is actually something we've seen from our customers, right? In the sense of, you like this idea, and we all like this idea of having one place to hold all of the kind of things that have been approved, things that you want to make sure go into production. And then you would often copy paste them, right? Similar workflow for style guides, right? You have your style guide and then you'll either clone from a place. So this is not something that we said, hey, we want to recommend working this way. This is actually how a lot of you already work. And I know that's how I work, right? I like this idea of having a place for certain information like components and variables. And so we wanted to make it easier to say, hey, well, if you already have that single source of truth, go ahead and pull it into different sites that people are working in. Now, nothing prevents you from continuing to work and create multiple pages within one website. Really, that's up to you and how you structure your workspace. And really, I think for me, the more I think about why this stream was these two features is all about flexibility. It's all about giving you the ability to, with slots, for instance, to create more complex layouts and deciding whether props or slots are the right decision for your client, or and same thing with libraries and how you think about them. You can have multiple libraries. You can work in one site. Really, it all depends on how you and your client want to work. So Glenn, hopefully that answers your questions. Okay, so scenario, section on a page. So question from Ted. Let me bring up like this. Let me bring up, and I can bring up the question. So keep dropping them into, so Ted asks, scenario, section on a page. It is a component. One second. There we go, clear. Okay, client wants to insert the same component into both slots, but wants a variable in that component to be different in the two instances. Great, that's a great question. So let's imagine that they want to provide flexibility within the nested slots, the new components, right? And what's important to remember, if I go back to my browser, is that you still have on, if we go here into IBM, you still have the flexibility of props within the slot, right? So let's imagine you want a call to action in one of these cards, and you want the user to say, I want a call to action, and maybe I don't, right? So it'd be very easy to even take an existing call to action, maybe even a component, add it into this card, and then go ahead and add a property for visibility, right? So what the beauty of component slots is that you're adding in functionality, right? Which expands what you can do because you're mixing both, right? So hopefully that makes sense. So if you can add visibility parameters or properties, you can even do components within components, right? We can have a slot within this card for call to actions. If we have 50 different buttons that are optional, right? So yeah, so that flexibility is still there. So let me know, Ted, if that answers your question. Really appreciate it. Really great question. So Kev asked, what happens when those components, once you transfer the site over to a client's workspace? So I do think they are detached, right? We are not sharing. I'm gonna just go back here. The question from Kev. What happens to components once you transfer them over to a client site? They become static, right? If I'm not like 99.9% sure. And that you would have to rebuild the library and recreate them into those components and component properties. So I'm not sure if the components are detached, but I'm pretty sure that the workspace library no longer exists, right? So we're not transferring workspace libraries over, but I do think the components might stay. So you wouldn't have to rebuild the properties. You can just rebuild the library. But you know what? I will confirm with you, Kev, and I'll add a little confirmation in the description. Question from Kev, is there a notification to other sites when a change has been made? Today, there is not, right? There is no notification. You do see that there are changes when you open up. So if I go here, as we did before, so let's imagine we're removing this, right? And let's turn this back into, oh no, removed the wrong thing. Let me go back into my component library. And let's make a change here. Let's remove that. Let's just keep it like this for now. And let's publish that change. Remember, two-step change. Go here. Review updates. We see those changes. We're going to share those updates. And then we go over here. We're going to bring those in. Now, there is no notification. There's nothing that says, hey, this component that you're using has been changed. That is feedback we have received. So I will let the team know again. Go over to components, come here. Here, you'll see that there are updates, right? And there's a little notification here when you open. This is the extent of the notification. I don't know if you can see it. It becomes a little red here to tell you that there are changes. So if you are opening up your component library, component tab often enough, you'll know that there are changes. We're going to accept those updates. Okay. Question from Airbus. Great question. Can we drag multiple components into... That is a good question. Let me test it. I'm pretty sure the answer is no, but I don't see why. Let me go into IBM. And let me go into here. And let's imagine I want to add another card. You can. So you can add multiple components, because ultimately a component slot is as a div. Really, that's what it is. So you can add multiple, and you could imagine, actually, this is a good point where you can add a CTA as a separate, as long as C, right? Maybe we'll have to make that flex to make this available, not flex, but make it block. So, but yeah, you can drag multiple components into a slot, because that is simply a div, right? A slot is just the promise of a component in a div. Okay, great. I mean, yeah, I learned something here today too, which is great. Always, sometimes you think a little bit about outside the box, and what's amazing is that we've seen so much of the community, and I saw Marcel, thinking about different ways that you can use this on the, I would say, complexity scale, right? There's no reason why you couldn't have a section, right, as a slot with a component, a container in it. So if we go here, the way all of these sections are structured is the same, right? So if you have a maybe a little more a tech-savvy client, you can say, well, we always start a section with a sectioned component, and then within that, there's a slot for whatever it is that you want. Maybe it's the layout, maybe whatever it is that, and you can create different structures with this system. So yeah, I think I have a tweet from Marcel or Sam. Yeah, right here. I'll drop it in the chat, thinking about do you prefer slots or props, right? How much should you rely on one versus the other? So if you want to join that conversation, it's happening over on X. Okay, next question. Marcel, a good point here. You can move components from a shared library over to your site components prior to moving a site to a client's workspace, right? So you can bring them all in and then move that over to the client. So any alternative, so let me go back here. Here we go. Any alternative solution when using, oops, it's like hiding. Okay. Class attributes and components to avoid deleting combo classes when clearing or cleaning the CSS unused class. I don't believe so. I believe that is a current limitation. So, okay. So I'd like to show those two cards on a page in one slot. How would that work? I mean, you can style the slot, right? So imagine that if we go here, slots can be styled, right? So if you're expecting to potentially put two cards in, right here, I just gave them an empty div, but you can style this maybe as a flex vertical with some spacing, right? And so, oh wait, you're not seeing my screen. Apologies. There we go. So I'm here in the slot itself, and I could make this flex vertical. So if you're putting in two cards, you can put them side by side. Yeah, thank you, Angelo. So you can style that slot. So right, it's simply a div. It's a div with the promise of a component in it. So you can style that slot however you want. So Temple asks, why have 3 slots rather than just one and give that slot a 3-column class? Yes, that is an option. There is no right answer here. And I think you can totally say, well, we're going to just do one. You can style one slot and say you have the option of putting in one card. The reason I didn't do that personally is because this wouldn't look good on its own. So this card, if the end user only puts in one, it blows up. It takes up 100%, right? And so the challenge there is that I don't want to give that flexibility to that customer in the way I've built these cards, right? And so I want to force them into a column layout because I know that that looks better, and that's how we've approved these designs. But really, that's up to you. If you've built these to have a max width, you can totally say, okay, we're going to put 3 cards and then style the slot in a way that is conducive to that. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, Ted, the question was in 2 parts. Okay, let me read the other part. Yeah, so the question is, I have a blog built in CMS with a listing page with cards built as components for each blog entry. In other words, no editable properties in the components. I'd like to show 2 of those cards on a page in one slot. Well, I think this is kind of more of a conversation around when should you use the CMS versus when should you be using component slots. So I think in your instance, because this is very CMS driven, you should be thinking of how do you filter and show the right information on the page versus leveraging component slots. So it's always a little hard to answer these live because it always ends up being depends, right? It really depends on your structure. So gonna leave a last minute if folks have any other questions. Really, let me come back here. What I hope you take away from this live stream is seeing slots and shareable libraries, libraries that you can share across your workspace as additional flexibility. But the work is thinking about how does my client or my team think about design systems, right? The question we just had around 3 columns versus 1 column, right? Are cards flexible enough? And as you play and explore component slots, I'm sure you'll learn more. You'll learn how your team prefers to use it. Okay, so Kev comes back. Oh, right. I'm sorry, I missed your question before. Customer landed here and click on the links in the nav. How do you make sure they get back to the IBM page and not the page for another company? Yeah, I think in that case, you would have to think about your structure differently. I assume now if you go back to the home These are kind of like one-page layouts, right? And so I assume that if they click home, they want to go back to the company home. I think that would require a little bit of building. You would have to make the nav potentially dynamic based on the page, and those could be done with properties. In your instance, I would probably think of leveraging a CMS more, right? Because if I want the page to have different end links for each client, I would expect one page, right, to have different links, and I would put that link in a CMS field. So again, it's always a question of how do you structure and what are your goals? And this provides a little more flexibility. So hopefully, Kev, that answers your question. So in your case, I would probably think of each page as a CMS item and then change the links based on the CMS item. Ted asks, can you talk a little bit about how this allows to use fewer classes? I wouldn't necessarily say it reduces the number of classes you can use, right? It just takes it provides more flexibility in leveraging existing components, right? So for instance, here, back to browser. Here, we had these card components, and we wanted people to allow them to create a 3-column layout with whatever combination of cards that we want, right? That was our goal. And before, we would have to create more components. We would say, okay, well, do you want 1, 2, 3, right? So every single card as a Cozy Winter Retreat, Serene Tropical Island, something else. Do you want add 1, 2, something else, right? And you think of all the permutations that are possible, that creates a lot of components. Instead, we see this differently. We see this as a 3-column layout. That is our first component, right? With 3 slots in it. And we give the person building whatever page they want to say, use whatever card you want. That's really up to you. So we're not actually reducing the number of classes. What we are is providing more flexibility and using our design system that we have in place and allowing it to do more. So wouldn't necessarily be reducing classes. Hope that makes sense. So Airbus, I'm so happy that this was informative. It was a great joy and pleasure of me. I forgot to let you know, drop your name in the chat. Fill out the form in the chat. We're going to do credits here in a moment. So if you haven't, I'm going to talk slowly here to give you a chance to add your name to the credits. It's always a pleasure. I'll be back here soon. We don't really have streams plans for the rest of the month, but make sure to subscribe to the channel and to live stream updates. We send an email 30 minutes before we go live. There's a link in the bottom of this description, but it was truly my pleasure. Thank you, Neftali, Kev, Ted, Angelo, all of you. Really appreciate all of you joining. So with that, now that I've given you a little bit of time, let's go into the credits. I really appreciate all of you joining. So where are we today? Who do we have? All right, we got Wu Haki. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Marcus, Ted, Alice, Peter, Martina, Jesse, Leon, Laginda, Durga, Angela, Fatia, Matt. Thank you all so much for joining. I'll be back later in the month. Thank you again, and have a great week, and keep building amazing and scalable design systems in Webflow. Have a great week, everyone. Bye-bye.